welcome to Trail Talk here on LTTV. I'm Chris Forde. I'm the Director of Marketing for Illinois Eastern Community Colleges and Lincoln Trail College. And joining me is Dr. Zahi Atallah, the President of Lincoln Trail College. Zahi, how are you today?
I'm doing great. And this week again, we are in the student lounge at Lincoln Trail.
Right.
And this is, in my opinion, central to what we're going to be talking about.
Yes, and this is also an exciting time for us. So today is the first day of fall classes here at Lincoln Trail College. Always exciting to bring our students back to campus.
No doubt. We have one job at the community college, and that's the success of students. So when they're back in the swing of it all is when life is back on campus.
Yeah, so over the last couple of months, Zahi, we have been talking a lot about the future of community colleges and student success. Mm-hmm. And we're going to kind of talk through sort of some of the big things that you and I took away from that over the summer. So, Zahi, just to start off, what was your biggest takeaway from what we've talked about over the summer?
To somewhat paraphrase a couple of the folks we talked to, that is Dr. Durham, the executive director of the Illinois Community College Board, and Chancellor Joe Garcia from the Colorado Community College System, is that irrespective, community colleges are still the leaders in workforce development in the state, in every state, and the nation. So we have and will continue to have a big role. But each person we've talked to, it doesn't matter who it was and what hat they wore, they brought up ideas for improvement that they know have worked because they have either enacted it where they work or have seen it happen in other places, which for me, many of those were aha moments. Why didn't I think about that? Is that what you got from those conversations as well?
Yeah, I mean, some of it seemed, very, very simple in talking about that. I remember, talking a little bit about something as simple as, making sure students have access to bus passes, for example,
yes,
that can be paid for through Pell funds, so that they are not having to necessarily pay out of pocket to be able to
commute to the college.
Yes, yeah, get to classes. Some of it makes total sense when you think about it. Just the idea of adapting to make sure students can succeed and making sure we're going to meet their needs. So scheduling, for example,
yes, big one,
is a huge one. And, here again, that's one of those where sometimes colleges have a tendency to do what's easy for them.
Yeah, yes.
And, that is not solely a problem that we see right here. It's a problem that happens throughout the nation. And if you are trying to bring in different populations of students, working students, for example, you need to be able to offer classes at times that work for them.
Right. As you said, and we are guilty of that. Again, it's nobody's fault. It's just the tradition of how we've done things for decades. We focused, in the case of Lincoln Trail, our peak time for class offerings is at 8 in the morning, and then it tapers off, gradually until you hit the early afternoon, and by mid-afternoon, it's ghost town. Well, that fits the schedule of a full-time student, possibly. It fits the schedule of somebody who's second shift. Well, what about the third and first shift? We have very little on Friday and nothing on the weekend. And yes, we've heard and we'll continue to hear, well, we tried it this year, it didn't work. It's not about the onesies and twosies. That's a message that we got, I think, that I got from our conversations with the various people, is how do we enact the systemic change? How do we let people know? And how do we support people when they come?
Right, and I think that's one of the things that's very important, because you talk about that support, and you're not talking about just exclusively having classes in the evening, for example, or
Right.
on a weekend, for example. It's making sure they have access to other services, advising, libraries, all of the different...
Food service.
Food, yeah. It's making sure there's custodial services available. There is IT services available, so that all of these things can be supported.
Right.
And, it's a realization that a college isn't just on a 9-to-5 schedule with everybody. And that's a big change when you think about it. But at the same time, it's kind of one of those, well, yeah, sort of things.
Yeah, why didn't I think of that? Well, another person who brought up something that I thought was very salient was Dr. Romero Halomu, who talked about the significance of guaranteeing of schedule. And this is something that I was involved with at the same college he still works at. And the importance of that is people hate to enroll, come in, oh, sorry, we closed it. Is it on the student? It ends up being on the student. And then imagine where the student is going to be next semester. Are they going to come here? No, they cancel classes all the time. That's going to be the word on the street, right?
Right, that's the perception.
That is the perception. And then, we're not filling those sections, therefore, what we learned from it is, well, nobody's going to come. So we're fulfilling that prophecy in many ways. It perhaps behooves us to rethink our mission in the sense of, why are we here? And who are we serving? And it doesn't mean it's going to be solved on the back of the same individuals, but maybe now there are opportunities to look at the bigger picture. Am I making sense? I don't know. This is what I learned.
Yeah, no, I that point resonated with me a lot too, because actually that is something, years ago, I wanted to take a class here that was going to be available in the evening, and that class ended up being canceled. I was excited about that class, and the class didn't get enough enrollment, so the class was canceled. Then that class wasn't available to me, and it for me left a bad taste in my mouth at that moment.
Exactly.
So, there's certainly a financial risk.
Is that why you went to take a class at MIT?
I did, but that was a different class at that time. But that's the kind of thing. There's certainly a financial risk there that the college assumes somewhat by guaranteeing a schedule.
Yes.
Because you're saying that, hey, we're going to offer this class regardless of how many students we get in it, within reason, certainly.
Right. But from my own experiences, it's not as bad a cost as one thinks, because shadowing sections, and Romero explained it, shadowing the classes means you don't open up 100% of your schedule. You're opening up 70 to 75%, and you're growing from there. And you're only growing from there. You're not going down. So, in fact, I would say it is a more efficient way, and I'm not going to call it smarter way, but I'm going to say more savvy way of answering the demand and telling people, segue, but if I were to have a brochure that says I am selling those grapes for $2 off, and I don't have them, what's going to be the word on the street?
Bait and switch.
Bait and switch. And so we need to think about it. I mean, we have a tendency of thinking of our student as a one-time customer. And I'm sorry, education is a lifelong thing, whatever the thing is, that needs to be nurtured over a lifetime.
Absolutely. And, thinking about that, there are a lot of different opportunities for that. Certainly, yes, we want students to come here, get their certificates, get their degrees, their 2-year degrees. But at the same time, when they go off into the workforce, there are the opportunities for workforce development training that happens in there. We regularly work with companies locally and talk with them, what are your needs? How can we address those needs? So again, it's one of those things, maybe they need a very specific class on Microsoft Excel, for example. We can meet those needs for them, and we bring those students back for a course like that. But there are also opportunities to take classes for fun. There are opportunities to take community education classes. So there are a lot of opportunities to engage, not as a full-time student, and not even as a degree-seeking student.
Right. Yeah, education, we have created, in the world of education, those silos and those paths that are so rigid, associate, bachelor, high school diploma, certificate, diploma. In Wisconsin, we had 1-year diplomas, 2-year diplomas, technical diplomas. We can call them everything, but for the industry, what does it mean? It goes back to the conversation I've had with you a billion times, probably gave you headaches. What does an A mean? Doesn't mean anything. It means something on your path to get an associate degree or a bachelor's degree. But to an employer, how relevant is it?
Right, they want to know you have the skills that meet their needs.
The know-how and the skills, the knowledge and the skills that meet their needs. So, we've created a beast in one way, shape, or form, and now it's time perhaps to rethink it. This is a message I got from almost every single one. Chancellor Garcia also brought up, he talked about the way funding at the state level happens for all education. Right? Do you remember that part?
Yeah.
And if we stop and think about it, if we're all in the business of education, and in many ways it is a business, and if our vocation is to teach individuals, then does it really matter what the course is taught, for as long as it meets the same outcomes? Well, I don't want the high school to teach the course because they're going to take away from my classes, and the university where somebody transfers doesn't want them to take the classes with me because we're fighting for the same population.
Yeah, and it's a very complex problem because, you do run into that. You do run into everybody, with a limited number of students, and we're reaching a nationwide baby bust era.
That's true.
Where there are not as many higher education students to go around nationwide.
Right.
So there is fierce competition for those students. So, universities are not going to want community colleges to take away from their classes in scare quotes, and down the line.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
That model doesn't make a lot of sense.
If we were a business, we would have probably figured that one out quite a while ago. And for that matter, we know that the private for-profit elements of higher education have figured out certain things. They were some of the first adopters of online instruction. They're some of the first adopters of hybrid and flexible education. They're some of the first adopters of so many of the things that people need, and unfortunately we have been so rigid
Take for example the idea of an adult that has come back to college. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. this is something that we see with regularity. It's something we want to see more of.
Yes.
Making sure they get credit for what
life
they've
and
already
work
learned.
Experiences. Yes.
Yep. So they are not having to take classes that are repeating knowledge that they have.
Yes, credit for prior learning. Excellent point you bring up. And it's not a dig at marketing, but our ads and our shows typically show, at least at Lincoln Trail, they typically show the 18 to 20 youth, as opposed to when we look at the ads, nationwide ads of the private for-profits, whether on TV or on the internet, they have a mix, and they're showing you a mother taking care of a child, and then when the child is asleep, taking a class. They're showing you a veteran or a welder or a nurse taking classes and improving. So it's also in the messaging. Again, I really don't mean it as a dig, but in many ways, the conversation you had with Mr. Badger, who is a returning student, I think is that potentially that example that we want to make more of. And if you want to tell folks what I mean by that.
Yeah, so we had a student that came through here. He graduated this past year, and he was someone that came to us after losing his job and was starting over, and he took advantage of a workforce program that is available to people in a position like his. And I remember one of the things he talked about was coming back to college late in life, and it's an intimidating thing.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You're walking into a class predominantly made of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, and you may be old enough to be their parent.
Yeah.
And how am I going to fit into something like that? And
fitting in plays a big role, and everybody's sticking with it.
Absolutely. And that's a pain point that I have heard from other adults that have come back to college for whatever reason. There's that intimidation factor, and I've talked to people even in their mid to late 20s that have said the same thing.
Right.
They feel like they will not relate to their classmates.
Yeah. And in some ways, it ties into some of what Dr. Deborah Bragg brought up in the mission of and the importance of community colleges, in particular rural community colleges, as being that first place. And for somebody who was at the University of Illinois, an extremely selective university, the University of Washington, an equally selective institution, to talk about community colleges as being that champion of the common person in rural areas, that is, and saying it for years and years, nationally and at local levels, that's really what we should think about going back to. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, you think about access, and for some people, in a rural area, we may be their only access to higher education. Especially again when I think about that adult population of students, they probably don't have the flexibility to drop out of life to become a full-time residential college student somewhere. So community college is going to really drive their future, and the importance of making sure we have the things that meet their needs.
Yes, yes. I a flashback from a prior life in my previous haunt, or one of my previous haunts. Our welding program was routinely filled with individuals of very advanced age sometimes. I remember there was an individual getting closer to his 90s, Mr. Kennedy. And I mean, he's old enough to be a great-grandparent of so many in that classroom, but we're being graced by those people thinking about us. So what do we do to support them? And routinely what we've done is rely on those placement tests and tell them, no, you can't take college classes because you're not college ready. You don't know how to play school. So go back several semesters, sometimes go back to learning how to read and learning basic arithmetic. And that was part of the conversation I had with Dr. Bickerstaff from the Community College Research Center, which is that's the education, the remedial education reform is one of her passions, and she's been researching it. And you can't just label an individual as needing remediation just because. How do you meet them? You just talked about the credit for prior learning, which is no more than what have you learned in life. We've all learned things in life. We do it so readily with folks that come out of the military. We look at their DD 214, and we say, well, you've taken those things, you should have learned this and that. Excuse me, but if you've worked on the floor of a Marathon or a Victor Dana or a Hershey, I'm talking about local Fortune 500 employers, but it's true wherever, there's a lot of learning you've done there. You've obviously learned safety. You've obviously learned to read and write. You've obviously learned to communicate. Why isn't that part of the support we provide you, a recognition of who you are? So we make life easier for Mr. Badger or Mr. Kennedy that I mentioned and others.
Well, Zahi, this is a topic that I think we could literally talk hours on.
We could. And knowing us, we would.
You and I will probably continue this conversation with each other many times over.
Yes.
But, I think one of the things that just to kind of leave people with is community colleges especially, we center what we do around the success of students.
Yes.
And, at the end of the day, that is what drives all of our people here in what they do individually to help out students. And there's a ton that can be done to make that better.
Yes.
But there's a ton of things that we're doing already to make that experience good for our students.
And we sure are. Yes, we have learning opportunities and moments, but on the whole, everybody recognizes how massive our footprint or our contribution to society is locally, at the state level and nationally. Again, community colleges form the largest higher education system. It's not a system, but a framework across the nation, and in every state that is also the case. So we are doing something right.
Absolutely.
Or many things.
So if you like content like this, what we've been talking about on Trail Talk today, be sure and subscribe to our channel, ring that bell down below, and you will get notifications when we post more episodes of Trail Talk and when we post anything else to our channel here on YouTube. And certainly follow us on our other social media platforms as well. So for Dr. Zahi Atallah, I'm Chris Forde. We'll see you next time on Trail Talk on LTTV.